Indeed, I would have liked very much to meet you all in person, and well, it looks like this should be soon possible again. But it's also good to be with you. As I said before, unfortunately, I could not attend all your conference because, and I will mention this at the end, next week we are having our annual meeting. And as you can imagine, 3 days before it starts, there's always a lot details to look at. So I'm unfortunately just with you during this session. But yeah, so we have about 1 hour in the program, as I saw. So I think there is really the opportunity to discuss and to talk together. So I prepared the presentation, so I will talk a little bit, but I hope really we can also exchange. And I was asked a bit to talk about the challenges and the post-pandemic world and doctoral education. So what I will try, and you will soon see my PowerPoint presentation, is really to, wait a second, sorry, it takes 1 second, I need to open something, I can still talk. So I really try to have a more broader approach to all of this. A second, I made a mistake before with, it will come soon, it's here. So yes, I would like to talk about, do you see it? Yes, about the whole approach to the pandemic and to the post-pandemic situation from the perspective of universities and doctoral education. So hoping that this will give us enough food for thought and for discussion. And I'm looking into different aspects. So maybe where I'm coming from, I'm from the EUA Council for Doctoral Education. We are a membership service of EUA. As Dmitris has already introduced us, we are the largest European doctoral education network with now 256 European universities, and I'm sure many of your institutions are as well, so you're also a member of us. We are driving doctoral education policies and promoting cooperation, exchange of good practices, identifying and monitoring trends in doctoral education, and regularly organizing several kinds of events on emerging and fundamental topics of doctoral education. I just mentioned some of them in this list. We had workshop on research integrity, research assessment becomes more important, open science, digital transformation, collaboration, career development, but also the well-being, for instance, of doctoral candidates, which is becoming increasingly important in the last couple of years. And for instance, also SDGs, societal dimension, and so on. So we see really a broad approach, or we develop a broad approach to doctoral education, looking into all aspects, and also how the doctorate and doctoral schools and program can contribute to the institution and to their strengths. So I also added some examples about events we have done the last 12 years, so you see a little bit the variety of topics we are doing. And as you see on the bottom, it's increasingly written online, but we hope to be soon on site. For instance, next summer, we want to meet in Manchester, UK for the next annual meeting. So about the doctorate in Europe itself, I'm sure I'm just telling you something, you know everything already, but just to remember, doctorate as a key element of the universities in Europe, the oldest degree we actually have since the 14th century, starting more as a degree giving you the right to teach, therefore this doctore, but becoming actually a research-based degree in the last 200 years. In the last 15 years, we have had this development, and there is no time to talk about this in detail, but just mentioning it with the Salzburg Principles of 2005, and then subsequent documents, 2010, 2016, which laid actually a foundation of a common approach to structured doctoral education in Europe. Looking into development of doctoral schools, like 15 years ago, we had about 25-30% of structured doctoral education in European institutions. We are now about 95%. So most universities do now have some doctoral schools or programs of some structure which provide additional support for doctoral candidates. However, this is not something exclusive, which means less or no influence, for instance, of supervisor. To the contrary, it's really much becoming a shared responsibility between institution, professionals, academics, and the doctoral candidates. We also have seen an increased number of national legislation being influenced by this, and much of this connected to the discourse regarding knowledge society and seeing research and supporting researchers as a driver for growth. And in the last years, also an importance to connect actually what early stage researchers are doing and training to some other emerging challenges of universities nowadays, and I will mention them in the rest of my presentation. We speak about internationalization, digitalization, and so on. So, doctoral education, what's next? As I said, I would like to talk about 6 elements, and please, if I'm too long, let me know, and I will try to speak faster or just jump something, but looking quickly into digitalization, internationalization, and the funding, but also postdoc and researchers' careers, research assessment of societal engagement, all aspects which every day when you look into what's on the table or what's in the discussions in the university areas is discussed, and I would like to connect this to the area of doctoral education. So let's start with the digital world of doctoral education. And the first question is, and here I will actually tell you something from a survey we have done and are doing still, and it's still not published. So this number here are preliminary numbers. We are working now, but they're also not an extreme surprise. We will further discuss this number next week at the annual meeting. So you're also invited, of course, to join us in the discussion, and we will present it and publish it at beginning of next year. So the pandemic provided, of course, the opportunity to explore and collect practical experiences. So 97% of universities said we have increased online doctoral training. We need to look actually which university said we haven't been increasing the online, because actually most of the thing we do now is online, but 93% mentioned digital or virtual mobility, so the connection to internationalization, say later, and 90% said we also increased actually the online supervision. What we think also for further discussion, it's important to distinguish between this emergency digital doctoral education or emergency education, which in most fields of the universities actually worked quite well. And most universities, when you look into all the other survey of reports, that actually within weeks we could make changes which we felt would need years to happen. So going online in emergency situation was quite easy, and there were fast universities. However, we also need to look on the more longer impact where, and this we have also seen, it's much more complicated to what degree digitalization will in the future impact supervision, impact research, examination, registration, and many other parts. So will it just mean we will use a bit more Zoom meetings in the future, or will it be also a broader transformation in using the digital? And here, nobody really knows, and it's definitely something to discuss about. What we can say that new forms of digital training, of communication, have accelerated and do accelerate in the moment, and we see changes, as I said, we haven't seen before. At the same thing, and we should not forget this, the open science debate and the question about, for instance, dealing with data hasn't started with the pandemic, has been, is of course older, not much older. It's in the last 2-3 years we have especially talked about issues like fair data, also in doctoral education more explicitly. However, we have seen this as well in our survey, but we also organized this winter webinar about this. Questions like fair data or research data management are becoming more important even for early stage researchers, and universities are looking how to approach this. We have also the raising of awareness for the societal and ethical challenges of digital technology, especially in the context of artificial intelligence. And here I would like to talk or mention artificial intelligence as one aspect where research will be affected. For instance, AI becoming a part of research practices and the need to be aware of these ethical challenges here. We have the question of training and additional training needs. We need to look at it. AI may affect careers and researchers' career paths, and also the question, do we need to train AI skills specifically, or to what degree this is also part of training, and also how universities are organized. It's still a discussion which may be not for today, but to look, will this also somehow impact organization of universities? So what I wanted to say when it comes to digitalization, there has been a very fast process of emergency digital doctoral education. We are now seeing that some elements will stay for longer, but it's still very much open how digital and how it looks like to be digital in the future in the area of doctoral education. My second point is the internationalization, and here just this statistic of mobility. What we can see in Europe, we have a very diverse international, when we speak about mobility, international mobility is very diverse. It's very much connected to probably also financial power of certain countries. Some countries in Europe have about 40% of international doctoral candidates. Others may have 2 or 3%. But definitely the doctorate is the area where we can find the highest mobility within this continent. Now, becoming the context, what is actually driving this internationalization of doctoral education? First is that research is becoming increasingly global, and global problems require global solution, which leads actually to a better understanding that we need more of this collaboration also to address some emerging challenges like, for instance, the Sustainable Development Goals. We have, and this is back to the digital, the new technologies like virtual mobilities, like this use of Zooms like we do today in the doctoral training, which may also increase some international exchange, or if not increase, maybe change it. And it also leads to a discussion if the virtual is enriching the exchange or actually not really able to replace the real mobility. But we can say at the same time we don't think that there will be a replacement of the physical mobility. It's more a question about how to bring both together. Then, of course, the importance of, I don't need to mention all of this in detail, but the enrichment of research international mobility. I think we're all quite agreeing of this, and also internationalization becoming very important parts of the strategies of universities. So nowadays, many universities would say, yes, internationalization is not something nice to have, but it's part of how we see ourselves as universities. And at the same time, and this is also something we can discuss, and I had a little exchange with Mitris about that, of course, how is the international or global landscape of research changing? Questions like strategic autonomy and so on may place an increased importance, and well, how will this affect actually the doctorate? Definitely something to discuss. Now, again, about the effect of COVID, I don't tell you anything surprising. So on one hand, mobility is very important. As I said, up to 50% of doctoral in some countries are from abroad, and I had also some international numbers. So for instance, US had 30%, but in some, and here we see disciplinary differences in mathematics or computer science, they have more than 60%. And all survey and research show that there has been an effect on the mobility of students and or also from doctoral candidates and also of staff, and mostly in the context of a crisis and of a decrease of the number. And what we need to look at universities may be twofold. On one hand, well, how to deal with the doctoral candidates who have lost a lot by not being able to travel, and how, especially when we talk about rebooting somehow or restarting this on-site experience in doctoral education, how do we actually can support the ones which were not able to do important activities they were planning, but how can we do it in the future? Also looking into account that also other questions like the ecological questions may play a role, how we do in the future travel. Now this mixture of digitalization, internationalization, and increased virtual mobility may ask us if the doctorate is becoming more global in the future. And we have a blog actually in CD where one of our steering committee member, Hans Bungers, wrote an article I'm happy to share with you, if we will get into a global doctorate in the future, where you will choose your supervisor not in the institution you are, but having some kind of bringing together supervisors from quite different institutions depending on your interest. Okay, now the funding, I'm about in the middle of my presentation, please. We have had EUA actually had made a survey also now 21 about the impact of the pandemic on funding. And also here we can see that the impact has been seen quite high in some areas. So this is the number of surveyed universities. So for instance, when it came to research, to questions of infrastructure or learning and teaching, that actually the great majority of universities spoke that there is at least a medium impact by the pandemic on the funding in these areas. And what we, so what have been the impacts? On one hand, we have differences in funding models. In certain countries, universities depend on the fees of their doctoral candidates, especially as we know in the US, but a few other countries, and for them it has been, of course, very dramatic. And here we can be quite happy that still in many countries the funding is more depending on basic and public funding. So the crisis had not had this effect. The second is the question of time and funding. So what means that, especially when we speak, for instance, doctoral education of international funding like MSCA and so on, the pandemic had slowed down, of course, the funding, and people were not able to do in a year what they wanted to do in a year. While often there has been some flexibility in the deadline, there's not necessarily been flexibility in the way how much funding you got. So there were some problems here for significant number of doctoral candidates. The third point is the question of investment in doctoral education. So what we have seen also in EUA with our funding observatory from the last financial crisis, and I'm here with economists, I'm sure you know this all better than me, but what we have seen in the university sector is that recovery in some countries was very slow. So there are still countries in Europe which have not 100% recovered actually to the blow of the financial crisis 2008, 2009. So we are now, we need to look if this crisis we have now through COVID actually will lead to a quick recovery or even lead to more investment, as governments may have understood how important actually research is. And then we have also the question of number of doctoral candidates. Will the crisis or the COVID lead that more young researchers may feel like I don't take the risk of doing a doctorate, or may it actually lead that more people say, no, I want use, it may be a difficult economical situation, I may even start a doctorate due to this. So these are questions we don't know, but interesting to discuss. Now let's go, yes. So let's go to postdoctoral researchers and researchers' career. And actually that I took this image of all this gray and these colors was actually meant that what we don't know so much about postdoctoral researchers as we would like to know. There is little data about it. There is not a unique definition on postdocs. So it's a gray area which are increasingly becoming important in universities. So we have limited knowledge concerning this population. We know that important group in universities with an uncertainty of the career prospect, the lack recognition as specific staff category. And we have different significant differences between about how they are organized in different countries. What we know from the pandemic, and that's why I also decided to put this into the presentation, is that the pandemic, especially due to what I said before about these funding issues, when you have limited contract, the pandemic somehow showed even more what it means for many researchers who have a doctorate but have not fixed positions at universities, who suddenly had to deal with this funding challenges. What are universities doing? So that's also, you may wonder why, as somebody from the Council of Doctoral Education is addressing postdocs. I'm doing this because universities, and often in the context of the doctoral schools, are increasingly also approaching postdoctoral researchers by including them in the training or providing some additional training. Some of these questions we're also looking in our survey nowadays. I still don't have a number here, but we see that there is also quite a variety about how this training is actually provided to researchers in the universities. And connected, and this is also not 100% obviously connected to the doctorate, but still important, the questions of research assessment is also becoming more relevant in this context. I wanted to share some numbers we have from a survey we did in UA on research assessment. And what we have seen is that, as you all know, still research publications are still the key aspect how the work of early stage researchers is evaluated, and also mostly metrics, measuring research output based on number of publications, is still in the center. And I show you some surveys, so if you have after questions about having the original data, of course, just drop me a message. I will share it with you. But now I tried to be fast, so I already talked quite long. So from our perspective, what there is a necessity here is, if we want to address this postdoc challenge and precarity, and also increase the diversity of research in universities, there is an increased need to recognize the multiple role of researchers in the institution, and have also parity of esteem of different career paths, which may not always leading to be a full professor in an institution, but having more diverse way of having a career, not only focusing on publication countings. However, things are changing. And for instance, in the Netherlands and in some other countries, they're starting to change how research is assessed. And this is definitely also something we can discuss afterwards. Enable and valorize open science. And also, and here we come more directly when we speak that early career researchers need to be also trained and better understand what are the challenges and limits of different kinds of assessments they are assessed, so they're able to make the right decisions about their careers, and not only sharing these mindsets where maybe the supervisor have of only publish or perish, or which is usually the case, publish and perish. Now, to end, I go to the societal dimension of doctoral education. So the majority of doctorate holders are not working in academia. They bring experience and knowledge from academic research into societal areas. We all know that, but it's important when we speak about the post-pandemic situation that the doctoral education, when we speak about the question of trust in science, to bringing people bridging between societies and universities, the doctorate is playing an important role. And we have seen this in our survey. Universities are increasingly putting a focus on communication and communication trainings. And we have we had it just before, actually, with this, also with this contest. Doctoral candidates are increasingly involved in science communication, for instance, through my thesis in 3 minutes and many other things like blogs and social media and so on, all of this. At the same time, using the academic freedom engaging in society, cultivating and sharing critical thinking. All these are part of a civic engagement of researchers, which may be not in the center of doctoral education, but what we see is increasingly also from part of the representatives of doctoral candidates becoming increasingly important. And this leading to the question of interdisciplinarity and working with different areas. The pandemic has shown the importance of interdisciplinary collaboration, while maybe in the beginning there was the hope by just having virologists and pharmacists having a vaccine, everything will be solved. We have seen nowadays it's not so easy. You need different disciplines to work together to better understand the issues. We know that actually still academic degrees and doctorate reflect the organization of academia and disciplines. So you have a doctorate in history or in business. And this is also an opportunity to have people who are good in their disciplines, to bring them together and to support them to work together. But it's also a challenge because it's often not really recognized to be interdisciplinarian. However, it's becoming more important. There is always increasingly also a kind of a drive in this direction, and we need to promote and support this, and also train people to work in interdisciplinary context. This means exposure to interdisciplinarity, and again, career structures which favor or support interdisciplinary, even though not everybody will be an interdisciplinary researcher, having a good mix here. So it's becoming important, and this also means valorize all areas of research, social science and humanities as we have here present, and the technical science and the STEM science, not using, as it happens sometimes, SSH as an add-on for the real hard science, but to the contrary, seeing all science areas have their value and work together. So by saying this, I'm finishing, and I hope, yes, I had my half an hour exactly. We are having our annual meeting next week. It's for our member universities, but we have many of you are, I guess, from member universities. Otherwise, if somebody of you is interested, maybe you can send me a message. Please, you can see here the QR code should lead to the website where you will find more information. And thank you for your attention. In case of any questions and remark, I'm here for half an hour, and then you can contact me by mail or however you would like. Thank you very much.